welcome to the leadership team meeting on the 10th of February. I think the first thing to do is introduce ourselves to people who are watching from home and don't know which councillors are which. I'm Elizabeth Campbell, I'm the leader of the council. And should we go down the list which is in front of the screen? If you could just turn on your camera and then people will know who you are.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Anne Siren and I'm the lead member for communities.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Catherine Folkes and I'm the lead member for the Economy, Employment and Innovation.
Good evening, Jem Kamali, lead member for Adult Social Care and Public Health.
Hi, everyone. My name is Josh Rendell and I'm lead member for Families and Children's Services.
Hello, I'm Kim Taylor-Smith, deputy leader and lead member for Grenfell Housing and Social Investment.
Hi there, I'm Johnny Thalasitis and I'm the lead member for Planning, Place and the Environment.
Hello, I'm Mary Wheel, Finance and Customer Delivery.
Hello, I'm Emma Well. I'm the lead member for Culture, Leisure and Community Safety.
Great, so welcome to the meeting, councillors, officers and members of the public watching online. The meeting's being held in accordance with the Council standing orders and the protocol and procedures for remote meetings. Bear with us if we run into any technical difficulties. Certainly if I lose connection during the proceedings, I will hand over, I'm nominating Kim Taylor-Smith to take over and lead the meeting until I can reconnect. During the meeting, the recommendations for each item will be shown on the screen as we move through the agenda, but the full reports are available on the council website. And a few just little technical points. Could you all switch off your microphones unless you're speaking and switch on your microphones when you wish to speak, and ditto cameras. Questions, if you want to ask a question, can you either raise your hand or just put Q in the chat bar? I won't be responding to chat in the chat bar. It's really just to indicate that you wish to speak, but actually it's probably easier if you just put up your hand. As usual, I'll go through the leadership team, ask them if they have any questions, any comments as we look at the items on the agenda. I'll then turn to the chair of the OSC, and then I will ask Councillor Pat Mason, as leader of the Labour Group, whether he has any questions before I open it more widely to the floor. If you could, apart from the leadership team, if you're on the back benches and you wish to ask a question, it'd be helpful if you could just state your name when you put on your camera to speak. Okay. So before we start, could we please just join in 72 seconds of silence to remember all those who lost their lives in the Grenfell tragedy, and our governance officer will confirm once the 72 seconds has passed. So please, will you join me? And before you do, could you please turn off all microphones or telephones, anything else you've got in the room which might interfere with the silence, because we do wish to be respectful. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, I forgot to put my microphone on. I don't have any apologies for absence, and we've been through the list of all leadership team members, and they are all present. Are there any declarations of interest? No. And the minutes of the leadership team meeting held on the 13th of January, can I confirm that they're a true and accurate record and that you're happy for me to sign them? Good. Okay, can we then go on to paper A4, which is the revenue budget, capital programme and council tax 2021 to 22. Can I suggest that we split it into two, and that Mary, Councillor Wheel, we discuss first of all paper A4, and then once we've discussed that, we'll go on to paper A41 and A42, which Kim can lead. So if we just talk about A4 at the moment, that would be great, and you can see what the recommendations are on the screen ahead. But over to you, Mary.
Thank you. So tonight I'm very pleased to be able to present a balanced budget with only a limited impact on frontline services. And the fact that I can do so is largely down to good housekeeping. We've got exceptional officers across all the business groups, ably supported by the finance team, who've insulated us this year from having to make tough decisions on services. There are much greater spending pressures building and down the pipeline, but the medium-term financial strategy outlines our plans for trying to cope with this. I think the first thing to address really is agreeing the level of council tax to be recommended to the council. And the government has, in acknowledging the COVID pressure, increased the maximum by which councils can raise without having to have a referendum. So that's up to 3% for adult social care, it's usually 2%, and up to 1.99% for general council tax. And tonight, I'm reluctantly recommending that this year we raise the council tax by the full 4.99% to deal with the continuing extraordinary environment in 21-22 and to prepare and stabilise us for the challenges to come. My reluctance is due to a fundamental belief that we should be a low tax council because people are the best arbiters of their own spending priorities, and also because we all recognise that people will be suffering from the economic impact of COVID. In relation to this last point, it should be noted that we have a very robust council tax reduction scheme and that we can be confident that that will wrap round the most in need of support. But the impact of COVID and the emphasis that the government placed on councils to raise council tax means that the proposed increase is the prudent approach this year for this council. As our transitions programme picks up pace in the coming year, I'm more confident that we'll be able to balance the budget next year with lower increases in future, and that's what I aspire to do. I just want to quickly recap over our transitions programme because it is very important and requires buy-in all over the council. And the aim of it is to improve our services while making savings that protect the front line. And it rests on 4 planks: digitising whilst ensuring that everyone without access to IT is still included in council services, a workforce which is lean, fit for purpose and empowered, optimising our operational property by reviewing the spaces we occupy, and a procurement process that gets the most out of the £230 million we spend annually on procuring goods and services. I think we're off to a great start with the 1.6 million saving from the waste contract, thanks to all those officers, but there is scope for much more saving. In the last year, we've been faced with extreme circumstances, as you'll see from the outturn monitoring report, and the pandemic has created additional gross cost pressures of over 45 million. We are very thankful that although a significant sum has fallen to the council, we've been very well supported by the government. And despite these pressures, we've supported residents and local businesses in ways that we never have done before and proved that local services are best run locally. And I think what this shows is that local authorities should be trusted with more responsibilities and further devolution of funds. And we'll be looking at different ways that devolved powers could benefit residents and businesses in advance of the devolution green paper. So in conclusion, I'm proud to present this balanced budget and want to acknowledge both the enormous effort that officers have put in this year to deal with the pandemic and the support of my colleagues and officers in shaping this budget. I also want to thank the Overview and Scrutiny Committee for their contribution and recommendations, all of which I believe we should accept. And I very much look forward to working closely with them next year and starting the process for our budget and our consultations as soon as possible after the budget meeting in March. So very happy to take any questions or pass over to Taryn or Mike if they've got anything to add.
Thank you. Well, I'd just like to add, I'd like to draw everyone's attention to 4.1 and 4.2, that we have to realise that this budget report's been developed within the framework of the financial strategy, which was agreed by the Council in November 2020. The aims and the ambitions of the Council plan, it lines up with that. And then the financial implications of COVID-19 and the recovery framework, and the Council's desire really to minimise the call on the council tax. So we've had all these things, and we're operating, as we'll find out later when we look at our third quarter financial monitoring, in a really, really difficult, unstable environment and financial environment. And as it says, the current financial climate for local government continues to present significant risks. And I think it's against that background and the fact that we will remain in the bottom quartile of council tax that I think this has much to recommend it. But I wonder what questions fellow councillors have. Jem.
Thank you, Chair. Mary, I think I'm fairly certain on this, but could you clarify? I understand that the government has raised the precept that we're allowed to charge for adult social care. And obviously, it's been under huge pressures this year. Am I right in thinking that money is sort of ring fenced for our most vulnerable adults, or is it more of just a general pot item?
We don't have to hypothecate it strictly, but clearly the pressures on adult social care are such that it warrants that extra 3%. And it's not so much the number of cases and so on that we're dealing with at the moment that is pushing that pressure on us. It's the complexity of the cases, particularly the transitions from children's to adults, is putting a long-term pressure on those budgets and thoroughly warrants that 3% levy in this year.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Must be some. You've obviously written such a good paper, Mary. Somebody's hand's gone up, but I can't see who it is.
It's mine.
Oh, great.
So, Mary, you just said that there are some significant risks coming up for the council, which obviously there are. Could you tell us in your mind what you think those top significant risks might be?
Well, clearly government funding and the future of government funding is an enormous risk, not only the known risk that our funding will be reduced next year, but the unknown risk that any reorganisation of local government funding in the fairer funding process will cause. So that's one risk. Obviously, COVID and the continuation. I suppose maybe 6 months ago we thought we'd be out of the woods by now, or maybe 9 months ago we did. But clearly the first 6 months of the next financial year are going to be affected by COVID. And that's all the effects on people's incomes, on our businesses, our business rates collection. And all of that is putting pressure on us from every direction, really. But more importantly, it's putting a great deal of stress and pressure on our residents and businesses.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions before I open it up, or any observations from your own business areas? Josh.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, Mary, for that presentation. I think that was really, really good. I think what I'd just like to say from our own end, from my own end of Families and Children's Services, is that, like you rightly say, Mary, it's a tough year. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a massive impact, not on terms of budgets, of course, which we're doing today, but also in terms of mental health and doing the best we can as a local authority to help bring people through the current phase of the pandemic. But just pointing to my section, my portfolio, just like really pleased to say that, we're still doing the best we can. All our schools 100%. We're investing in, like you say, Mary, in your report, improving our children's centres. We're investing further £17 million in capital investment to our schools, which I think is really important because they're on the front line of the key workers and everything at the moment, alongside with doctors and nurses. And we're also opening the new Queen's Mill School in North Kensington and the Barbie School as well. So it's really great investments like that I think that we haven't cut necessarily frontline services in this portfolio, and it's great to see that we're trying to do our best to balance these budgets in very, very difficult times and very difficult circumstances. And I'd just like to reassure that all residents that we're doing our best in order to do that. If I may, Mary, ask a question, a bit of a segue there. In relation to the voluntary contribution scheme, we talked about that last year, and it's in the report here. But I just wanted to know if you have an update on that for residents who may not be particularly aware of the next steps that we're doing around that.
So there's no update at the moment. We've paused it during COVID, as the report says. We had after we consulted with residents, we then had. And did a key decision. We then had a lot of feedback from the voluntary organisation who were less enthusiastic or saw dangers that perhaps we hadn't envisaged. And given that this local authority has always had a very, very close relationship with the voluntary sector, dare I say more than with most other local authorities in the voluntary sector, we thought it was prudent to pause it. And then, to be honest, we've got overtaken by COVID, and I think it'll be at the other side of this before we look at it again and see if a modified scheme or a different scheme, or indeed the same scheme, is suitable in the long term.
Any other questions? Johnny.
It wasn't so much a question, but you mentioned if we wanted to draw attention or observe anything about the papers, and I figured that as residents may have been receiving letters today about the new parking permit fees, it would be good to draw attention to that in the fees and charges part of the paper. It's the first per gram of CO2 emission-based parking permits in the country, and something that I think is a good way through the budget of demonstrating our commitment to a cleaner, greener borough. So that's one of the things I wanted to draw attention to. And then just briefly to say that I'm aware of the pressures on planning income in particular, and that's something that I continue to want to monitor extremely closely, because I can foresee that it will take some time for development across the city really to come back in the way that we would hope.
And that's a huge drop, isn't it?
Well, exactly, and that's something that Mary opened by talking about good housekeeping, and I think it in that same spirit we need to fix our mind on that shortfall in planning income and think about exactly how we can make back some of that money, whether it's through efficiencies or spans and layers in the department.
Thank you. Okay, if there are no other questions or comments from the leadership team, I'll ask Mary-Therese Rossi, who's chair of the OSC. I know you've had a budget working group, and I know that lots of papers, etc.
Thanks, Elizabeth. If I may ask one quick question of something I don't understand, and then I'll say something about the budget working group. So I agree that we have to put up council tax by 4.99% this year, but on the paper underneath that bit, it mentions an increase in the council tax requirement of 3.9 million, and I'm not quite sure what that means. So if Mary or Taryn could explain that.
Yeah, Taryn, would you like to explain that? I'm sure you'll do it more cogently than I will.
Yeah, so no problem at all. So the 3.9 million refers to the amount of additional council tax income that will be generated as a result of two things really. One, the 4.99% increase, but also the latest estimate of the council tax base. So when we set our budget, we actually also have to take account of the number of dwellings that will essentially be generating the income, which has seen a slight reduction this year as a result of the increase in the demand for the council tax reduction scheme. So it's a combination of those two elements that overall we will generate around about 3.9 million in expected additional income. We do know that the impact of COVID may still have some impact next year, but that's what we're budgeting for, and that's what we're expecting at this stage.
So just to follow up on that, Karen, so what you're saying, although we're putting up council tax by 2% roughly, and then the adult social care precept, there'll be quite a lot of the people within the Royal Borough who won't pay that because they're eligible for the council tax reduction scheme, which is one of the most generous in the country, and that's what you're taking into account for that 3.9 million.
Yeah, that's right. So that gets taken into account in quite a technical calculation around what the council tax base is. So it almost takes into the amount of the expected income from the council tax reduction scheme, but also collection rates as well. So it's a bit of a technical calculation, which I won't go into, but yes, that's all accounted for as part of that 3.9 million. So the council tax reduction is aimed at supporting those that come forward and can't afford to pay not only the 4.99%, but just generally that need some support with their council tax bill as a whole.
Yeah, so not only are we trying to keep the council tax in the lowest quartile in the country, but we're also aware that if people aren't able to pay, that there is a council tax reduction scheme. Correct?
Yeah, that's right, and it's one of the very few that is still 100%. So for those, so it is tested against income and affordability. So it is one of the very few that are still paying 100% council tax reduction. So lots of authorities across the country, they almost set a minimum threshold. So, you know, some households have to contribute 5, 10, 15 or 20%. Ours is different. For those that need that support, they can receive up to 100% support.
Yeah, and given the terrible times that we've been in, we may have an increase of people seeking that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're starting to see, we were seeing a slight reduction in the numbers pre-COVID. However, we are starting to see that increase as a result of more coming forward for support for as a result of COVID. We're also very mindful that that may continue for a period of time. So I do think, you know, as it will take the economy some time to recover, there will be an awful lot of households that will need continued support for certainly well into 21, 22. So we're very mindful of that, and we'll be keeping a watching brief over that over the next 6 to 12 months.
Thank you. Sorry, Mary-Therese.
Yeah, I just to say something about the budget working group, which I think was a fruitful process, and I'm very glad that Mary has accepted the recommendations. I look forward to starting a bit earlier next financial year, and also to thank the officers and Mary for engaging with the group, and also for their efforts, because to produce a balanced budget against, you know, this kind of backdrop of extreme uncertainty, I think is pretty amazing. So, you know, thank you to Mary and to all the officers, and I hope that the working group will carry on next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Pat. Maybe Pat Mason's not here. Okay. Good. Well, if there aren't, are there any other questions? Anyone else want to raise anything? No, I think actually it's a credit that we've been through this quite often. You know, as I said, we had the framework, we had the medium-term financial strategy, and then we had the proposal set out, the council budget proposals in November. And then the scrutiny committee have looked at it. They've had a working party to look at it. So I suspect that that's the reason why we don't have a huge amount more questions, because we've looked at it. And of course, any recommendations we make will be submitted to the council. So if we look at the recommendations in paragraph 2, which are slide 1 of 2, do we agree the recommendations on this screen, which is basically saying we approve the revenue budget estimates for submission to the council, and then all the additional items on the screen ahead of you, I won't read them out. Agreed?
Agreed.
Slide. Yeah, here we go. And do we agree these recommendations too? Again, it's a recommendation to the council in summary, and then here you have the items. Agreed?
Agreed.
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 Thank you very much. Now we come to the housing revenue account budget. And can I suggest we take paper A41 and paper A42 together, Kim? Do you want to?
Yes, I'm very happy to just give a quick introduction to this. And again, I just share, that we've obviously been through this a few times, so I feel as though I'm becoming a bit of an old hand. I mean, I'll start by saying, obviously, the report talks about the HRA outlook being gloomy, and I think that's a very true description, because we are under a lot of pressure on this. And I really just wanted to highlight some of the big challenges that we face. And first of all, to remind the leadership team, last year when I introduced this HRA business plan, and I was explaining that we had estimated that the housing capital programme cost of was an initial estimate of £267 million that, subject to us getting the tenders in. Well, we're now getting some of the tenders in, and we're revising that estimate, and we believe that it's could be, 370 million. It's a significant increase, and this includes 30 million for fire safety works, which obviously reflects our unrelenting strive and towards having an ambition of having the highest possible standards in fire safety and going above and beyond what the statutory minimums are, but it excludes it incorporates some costs, but it excludes the big investment that is going to be required to make our homes meet our net carbon zero targets. And we're going to be talking about this later, but just to remind people, that the average age of our council property is sort of 1960. These are old buildings, and that is going to present a lot of changes for us. So, this is a staggering amount of money, obviously, we're talking about here, and it's going to place a great strain on the HRA, but I repeat that, we as a council are steadfast, in our commitment that we want to get our homes up to a very good standard. So I think if we think a little bit about the impact of these and the proposals that are contained within this paper, and I start this by saying that we're extremely conscious of the predicament of our residents and where they are, with the impacts of COVID as well. But as a result of this high level of investment, we're going to make a difficult decision to propose an increase of 1.5%. This would exclude, of course, the Grenfell Tower and Walk residents who have their protected rent and service charges. And I'm very grateful to our residents, and our discussions that we've had at the TCC, who understand, that over the next few years, we have this cost, because over the next few years, they'll see obviously the benefit of the increase in standards of their homes from the investment that we're making. But it's very important to take a very transparent approach to these difficult decisions, and more important, as I say, to involve our residents in this so we can keep them informed of what's going on. There will also be charges on heating and hot water, and we're increasing those by 8%, in line with the anticipated costs that we're going to be incurring in terms of energy. So again, just to really summarise, this is difficult, and we are in a bit of a precarious situation. And if you look at section 14 of the report, we're also highlighting a range of options that we have in order to address this finding gap. But I really wanted to sort of conclude by saying, obviously, good standards as far as our housing is concerned, I consider to be completely non-negotiable. But, costs are uncertain, and it means that I worry that the costs will continue to go up. It's going to be a big hard graft on our journey towards being an authority that consistently delivers top management services. But, I think that we're on the right track, and it's what residents expect. And I believe that this plan will eventually deliver. So I'm happy. Doug is here if you want to go into any of the detail, but I'm very happy to in fact, Doug, do you want to highlight on anything at all, or shall we go to questions?
No, that's fine. That's fine, Councillor. That's fine, Kim. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. I suppose my first question would be, say, well, residents' expectations are such that they recognise the fact that they need to have all these things, and therefore they're prepared to pay all these increases. So what evidence do you have of that? Have you done a huge amount of consultation, or are people genuinely okay with this?
Well, I think I'll let Doug talk about the feedback and working that we've been doing with TCC. Doug, do you want to get a bit of a flavour on that?
So the rent increase itself is reasonably modest at 1.5%.
Yeah.
And certainly in our discussions with residents associations, that's been understood. No one is usually, no one's happy, council leader, to wish to pay additional charges, but they understand the reason why we need to do this, and fully understand the funding gap that we have. This is from TCC. In terms of wider residents groups, again, the rent increase is expected. And you've got to remember this is the second year of rent increases after a period of 4 years where the rent was reduced. So it's still behind where it was initially.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And how many of our residents are in arrears with their rent now? And do we expect this to make it worse, or
Can I chip in on that before Doug comes in, actually, because I'm going to give credit to the housing team, is that we have a 4% arrear level at the moment, which is comparatively very good. And if we look at that tracking during COVID, we can see that there has been an increase in arrears, but it's been quite small, and it actually reflects people going on to universal credit. I think the credit that I'd give to Doug and his team is that they've been, obviously there are no evictions, there are no court actions, etc., but we've had a policy of telephoning people and speaking to people on the phone and giving them support and helping people go through their universal credit process. And I think I'm right in saying that Doug's team, have made over 14,000 calls in order to support this. So relatively speaking, our arrears are actually quite small. Doug?
Yes, so about 8% or 7.5% of our tenants owe over 8 weeks or more debt. Lots of people will pay monthly and show an arrear, so we really measure it at that level. So 4% is about average, but it hasn't gone up in terms of some benchmarking we've done with other boroughs. So Kim is absolutely right. That is something that we're quite proud of, because we haven't had to take punitive action, and we've done this.
Oh, I think we're losing you. Maybe, but I think we heard that there was no punitive action, and it was a question of actually working with people. So that does sound very positive. Okay, are there any questions from the leadership team for Kim? Josh.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Kim, Doug, thank you very much for this. I'm really interesting to hear. I just have a couple of questions regarding management costs, etc. So we say in the report, housing management costs are 16.6 million. Just on the face of it, seems quite large for bureaucracy, but does that include things like people who conduct repairs, all the other staff that relate to that, or is that just purely a management expense of us just churning over helping with residents and tenants and stuff, or is it a bit wider than that?
I'm going to hope Doug comes back on this. Are you here with us, Doug?
I hope you can hear me,
yes.
And I hope my son hasn't gone on the computer after I told him not to.
These things happen.
So, Councillor, most definitely, this is staff costs. These are our total staff costs and the overheads for running our business. If we are paying contractors and the operatives for repairs, it is separate. Okay. You have to remember, part of this, it is reasonably higher than we expect over time that this will go down. We have put additional resources in to get ourselves to a level where we can deal with basic delivery, and then once you've stopped your service failures arising, you can then reduce that. But at the moment, we want to make sure everyone gets the service, even though we know that the stock needs investment and so on and so forth. Once we can do that, then the level of contact will go down, and it also accounts for Lancaster West as well, where we've set up its own team. So we know that it's at a level which it certainly won't go any higher, but it will come down over time.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
And there's another hand. Oh, no.
Yes, that was me.
That was you.
Yes, it was slightly similar question about rents, but this time from the commercial portfolio, because actually what you're seeing on that is quite a good indication, or taking the temperature of what is happening to our businesses in the borough. So obviously you're saying the rents are being threatened, but I just wondered if you could tell us what level of voids you've seen, and therefore if you've got some sort of expectation as to how many rent-free periods there might be before there are new tenancies.
Again, I think I'll let me start, Doug, and then you can correct me. So we are forecasting overall, looking forward, about a 70% collection. On the last quarter's collection, it was lower than that. It was actually about 36%. But we do feel that this is going to increase. And one of the reasons for that is that we are now, having spoken to our tenants, we've got a good understanding of their circumstances. It's in our belief that if we apply some write-offs, then we will get people start paying again, in terms of people who are obviously very nervous where they've got a large debt behind them that they don't want to, they're reluctant to make further payments. So, you know, we have a reasonable level of confidence that we will increase it. But it's clear to say that over the last year, it has been extremely difficult. I mean, a number of our tenants are doing well, but equally a number of people are remaining closed. And I think, as I've said at previous meetings, it's very much our policy of dealing with people on a case-by-case basis. And it's very much our policy to retain our existing tenants within our properties, rather than get to a position where we have empty shops and empty units. I think one of the things I'm quite encouraged by is that we have had a number of vacancies of people who have left, which is impacting on our revenue. But we are getting actually interest on some of the larger units that we have available to rent. So at the moment, it's a little bit of cautious optimism. But if in answer to your previous question, historically, as I say, we've seen a big dent. Doug, do you want to add to that at all?
All I would say, Councillor, is that we have a minimal amount of voids, 5 or 6, but we've had notice on some large ones, which will impact on our debt, on our revenue going forward. But by and large, just to substantiate what Kim is saying, Councillor is saying, is that very few people have given us notice.
Okay, I'd like to ask one more question. You know, you talk about the current hot water system, etc., that we're putting up fees by, what was that? Sorry, I'm flicking through 8% or 7%. And then further on in the report, in the next report, you talk about communal heating and hot water systems, that you're going to have to make even more investment, right? So you're putting up the fees now, and then there's going to be a huge chunk of money that we need to spend to actually put new systems in place. How is that all going to be funded?
Doug? It's part of the capital program.
So the 8% fees is around the fuel charges, and the notification that we've had an expected increase in the fuel prices. The investment will be funded through the capital program, so it won't link back to people's rents, because that's what they pay their rent for, and that's the subject of the borrowing that we need to and other aspects that we need to consider to make sure that we've got the right level of investment.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the leadership team? Just to reflect, Kim, on what you said, that you know, with the capital program, if you look at all like the fire safety works and other works we've done, digitalization, I mean, there's just a huge capital program, isn't there? And actually, that's what it has to be, because you don't want people living in substandard accommodation, and nor particularly unsafe accommodation. So I think we probably welcome these reports. But before I come to the recommendations, I should ask Mary-Therese, as chair of the OSC, if she has any comments.
Yeah, if I could just raise a concern with Kim that I've raised before. We know that council tax is going to go up by 4.99%. Service charges are going up. The rent is going to go up by 1.5% and heating by about 8%. I'm just worried, you know, given what we heard last night in the meeting about more and more people having to go to food banks. I just wonder, you know, if all these sort of small increases are going to, you know, create real difficulties for some of our residents.
I think it's a really valid concern. I mean, again, Doug might like to comment. I mean, not forgetting that a lot of people that we talked about last night going to food banks will be in receipt of benefits, and consequently that cost would be covered. There will obviously be caps, and that's something we're going to have to talk to individuals about, about what that impact is. Doug, just remind me the percentage of people that are that might would obviously incur the costs rather than obviously being able to cover it from their benefits.
It's about a third that will pay full rent, if you like. But we've also set up a financial inclusion team which works with our residents, which is part of what's behind this success that we've been able to achieve this year, which is about making sure people are getting what they're entitled to in terms of claiming and helping people to get into employment. And even just because you're in employment doesn't mean you lose all your benefits. So it's about working with people to meet the rent that is being charged. For rent that we're increasing, the rent is clearly coverable by benefits where it's needed.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? No? Okay. Could we please agree to recommend to the council, in summary, all the items on the screen ahead of you, and also to recommend that the council approve the updated version of the HRA business plan, including the planned approach to funding the 5-year capital programme. And this will come to the full council meeting at the budget, and that's where it will be either decided, well, debated and then decided. So is that agreed?
Agreed.
Good. Thank you very much. Could we go on to item A5, which is the annual Treasury Management Strategy Statement?
Shall I introduce this, Elizabeth?
Yes, please.
So I'm not going to spend very long on this because we've only just recently had a Treasury management paper. This strategy for the coming year has really only 2 changes in it to the last year, and that is to add 2 types of investment, fixed income funds and enhanced money market funds. That still means that this remains on the very prudent end of the spectrum in terms of Treasury management. But as you will see from the paper, our returns this year on our reserves and our funds is very, very low. And this is just an attempt to give us another few ways of investing money that may increase that yield. And it's worth saying that we now have advisors who would look at any options that we saw or opportunities that we saw in those areas and review them thoroughly for us. And to have external experts on this, I think, is very important.
And can I ask you who they are? They're Arling Close, but
they're called Arling Close, and they are a very established firm. I don't know if Taryn or Mike want to add anything else about them. I've met them now, and Taryn or Mike?
Yep, sorry, they're coming in. Yeah, they're a very established firm who provide advice to the majority or the largest number of local authorities. So I think they're very good and bring a lot of expertise about what people are doing across the sector. And it's an important time to have that advice now that interest rates that we can receive are very low.
Yeah, yeah, and actually good to have really proper, stable advice at a time when you're trying to make very difficult decisions about money. And I suspect that's of some comfort to you, Mary, to have that, no? You're muted. Oh. Anyway, Josh.
That's good.
Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. Michael, Taryn, or Mary. The Bank of England mooting, especially at their PRC meeting last week, that we could very well see negative interest rates come in as early as September. I know we float that in the report just very vaguely, but just wondering what kind of impact that would have on this particular strategy if that does come to pass.
Mike, do you want to comment on that one?
Well, I mean, it will just make the position more difficult, and we'll get even lower returns if that does come to pass. So that's why it's important that we have access to a wider range of options in terms of making a return. But the main thing that we're doing, and the main thing that the advisors advise us, is that we don't now look at borrowing ahead. The interest rates are, this is the current advice anyway, the interest rates are likely to stay low for a considerable amount of time, so that we don't build up too much in terms of our reserves, so that we don't have too much money to invest and where we're not able to get a return, which is a different position from what it used to be, where we could borrow very cheaply and we could place that money for virtually the same amount. That's getting increasingly difficult. So it's important that we don't over borrow. And you can over borrow because you're over optimistic about, or I don't know if optimistic is the right word, but if you overstate the amount that you need, for instance, for the capital programme. So we've got to really manage our cash flow very carefully so that we don't run into that trap, particularly as rates that we can obtain are lower.
And hence all the stuff in the budget about reprioritising the capital programme and taking things out unless we actually think that we can use the money the next year.
Yeah, it's very important that we get that. Increasingly important that we get that right, and we don't borrow the money and then find we don't need it for 2 years, because basically that's costing us if we do that, and it's costing us more than it used to.
Yeah. Okay, are there any other questions from the leadership team? No. Marie-Therese, any comments from the OSC?
No comment from me. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Great. Can we agree what's on the slide ahead of us, which is the recommendations in paragraph 2? Agreed?
Agreed.
Great, thanks very much. Let's go on to paper A6, which is it's a Mike and Mary show again. Revenue and capital monitoring position, quarter 3.
So I don't think there's too much to say on this. Might disagree, but the position has improved slightly since the second quarter. Still not sure what the fourth quarter will show, but this is just showing us an overspend of 32.6 million, which really leaves us with a net position of we've got 25 million worth of government money coming in. So it leaves us probably having to, once we've spent our contingency, which we will probably for the first time ever, I don't know, use in its entirety, well, probably the second time ever use in its entirety this year, probably looking at dipping into our reserves to the tune of about 1.6 million. That position may change by the end of the year, but given the quantum of our spend to combat COVID, it's probably a better outturn than we might have expected. Mike, do you want to add anything to that? You're on mute.
Yep, I think that's the case, that there's still a bit of uncertainty about the fourth quarter, obviously because we've been in lockdown for it, but and that might make the position slightly worse. But because there's a fair amount of government grants available to us, they should cover that position, and so this is fairly reflective of where we expect to be at year end, despite the further lockdown. Obviously, it's a position I've never seen before, and no one's ever really seen before in a council like this, of 32 million gross overspend, but exceptional circumstances, and it is good that we can fund most of that from the contingency and the government grants that we're getting, and just leave a small amount left over.
And I guess that's why you have contingency and you have reserves for when you actually get to positions like this, that you do have an overspend and you need to be able to fund it. And actually, I can see here on the screen is exactly what we were talking about, the rephasing of about £20 million for the capital programme. Mm-hmm. So we can reduce our borrowing rates. Jem.
Thank you. I think I just personally want to draw attention to the adult social care outturn. It's adult social care and public health in the middle of a public health emergency managing to report an underspend, which I think it doesn't really do any justice to the storm that is coming. I think this is a financial, it's correct, obviously, but I think what it really shows us is that there's going to be an underlying cost to come that we really have to be planning for. And I think it goes back to the point around the adult social care precept at the beginning as to how important that's going to be going forward, because I think the numbers slightly mask the true cost of the public health emergency.
So you think despite the, so Jen, would you say despite the fact that you've got an underspend this year, it's totally justified having the social care precept?
Exactly. I think this report makes it seem as though we've actually sort of been underspending, but I think the reality is that there's a real issue coming down the line that we're going to have to address: the mental health issues, the care provision, all sorts of things. We could go on for a while, but I think it makes a good argument for why we need that social care precept.
Okay, thank you. Mary, have you got a question?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to add something, actually, if that's all right, and that's around the contingency, which I mentioned earlier. And you will have seen in the budget this time last year, I argued for a large contingency, partly, I think, on grounds of COVID, but mainly on the grounds of Brexit. And this year, you will see that we've built the same size contingency into the budget again. And this, obviously, on the grounds that we'll be concerned about COVID, but it's interesting looking back to see what the rationale was last year, which turned out to be the least of our worries, essentially financially, and COVID was the overwhelming need for that contingency.
Well, I guess, as you say, the point is to have the contingency for any such reason which comes up, whether lucky we didn't need it for Brexit, but thank God we had it for COVID, because otherwise we'd have been in the position of many other councils around the country. But because of officers and your prudence, we're in a place where we can we can look forward to, have a balanced budget this year and look forward to a balanced budget next year. So thank you for that. Mary-Therese, are there any comments from your OSC?
No comment from me. Thanks, Elizabeth.
No? Any comments from anyone else? No? Otherwise, can we please agree what is written on the screen ahead of you, which is, sorry, I'm just looking at my paper, which is everything in recommendations in paragraph 2. Okay, agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed. Okay, can we move then to paper A7, which is housing management resident involvement strategy, which actually is very interesting.
Yes, and that's me again, Elizabeth. So I think let's just start in terms of the context of this strategy. I mean, and I think it's first worth remembering, and reflecting on why this strategy is so important, because it was clear, you know, from the Grenfell tragedy that residents were not being listened to when they were highlighting serious concerns about the refurbishment programme. And this clearly was a serious failing, and we can never allow this to happen. So, you know, I welcome and feel like this strategy does highlight an important part of our journey, and will work to establish us as a lead in the way that we engage with our community. So I think just to cover a little bit of where we are, you know, I am very encouraged at the way that we've been engaging with our residents since taking back, you know, the stock control in March 2018, and we've revitalised a lot of the meetings, and we've referred to, as we do quite constantly, the importance of the Tenants Consultancy Committee, you know, which is an excellent meeting, and all the sub meetings that it also has, and where ready residents can, you know, they give very generously of their time to improve council policy and performance. You know, we had our resident housing summit recently, which we have continued online. Last year, obviously, we were able to meet in person, and we had over 200 people attending, but again, valuable engagement. But residents very much have a say over what happens on their estate, more so now than ever before. And our estate improvement programme and capital programme are designed to involve residents at every stage of the development. You know, we have a regular Housing Matters newsletter, which is designed by a panel of residents, and it reaches and goes to every single tenant. And we receive very positive feedback from those, you know, who read it and write to me, which is good. Last week, you know, as a point, we appointed a new director of housing needs, and that was done utilising a selection panel of residents, representatives from GU and Lancaster West Estate, RA, etc. You know, which is incredibly important. And this follows on a policy that we have within housing management on a recruitment of key people and residents having a say. So I think there's a lot to be admired by what the way that housing management team have placed residents at the heart of everything that we do, you know, but it's obviously something that we can't be complacent about. And despite, you know, all of our good process, there are still many people out there that want to get involved more than they are now. So, you know, this strategy has been co-designed by a steering group of residents and tenants and leaseholders working alongside our officers, and aims to obviously ensure that people from all backgrounds can help deliver it and hold the council to account. And very much important to make their voices heard. So, you know, the strategy includes a menu of involvement, you know, to allow everybody to get involved regardless of their experience and time, and that will include joining committees representing residents association, tenants, homeowners, as I say, sitting on things like the interview panels for resident facing roles, and shaping council performance targets for issues such as cleaning, repairs and antisocial behaviour. So I think really to conclude, Chair, I would hope that the leadership team will welcome this report. The government has put resident involvement at the forefront of their social housing white paper, and this is very much welcomed by us. And this involvement strategy aims to go above and beyond the standards where the government are rightfully setting for the industry. And I hope to be able to report back in the future on some of the terrific outcomes that come from many more of the residents getting involved and improving our services. So thank you. Again, I don't know if Dan wishes to add anything to what I have said.
No, thanks, Councillor. I think that covers it, though. Of course, we're very happy to take questions.
Dan, can I ask you a question first, and then I'll come to Anne, Siren. So that's great that we've said that ours is really good, etc. How do we compare across to others in London? I mean, I absolutely accept that we've made an enormous amount of progress, and having been to several TCC meetings myself, I would say they're very, I mean, people are really interested and spirited, and as Kim said, you know, thank you very much for those residents for giving of their time, because there's a lot of time involved. But how honestly do we compare? Because you've come recently, I suppose not that recently, within the last year or whatever, from a different borough. What's your take on it compared to others in London?
So I think there's kind of two parts of the answer to this question, if you like. There's something about there's something about the kind of the process, the way that this is set up, and I think I mean, Doug's on the line as well. He may want to add into this, but it does seem to me that one thing that we are doing, and I certainly wouldn't say that we're unique, but I would say that we're kind of, you know, we're now pushing into the realms of being among the better borough landlords on this. Is that we are is that this isn't just good in pockets now. This is more and more a kind of an approach which we're taking right, you know, which we're able to take right across the service, and by kind of codifying it in this way, in the way that it's set out in this report that's in front of you now, I think that does suggest a kind of universality of the approach. But the other part of the answer, which of course is just as critical, is that you can have all the procedures and processes that you want, but the culture has to be right. The culture both within the team and, if you like, the culture of the relationship between the team and the residents. And I would never say that we are where we would like to be on that, but the change that I've seen, the progress that I've seen, even in the time that I've been at the council, has been enormously impressive. And if anything, I'd say that the experience of the pandemic, the experience, if you like, that the staff and the residents have shared of the pandemic, has accelerated and embedded some of the culture of the relationship that we need to see a bit more. As I say, I'm absolutely determined not to give even the slightest impression that we're complacent about this. There's still an enormous amount of work to do, but I do think that what's set out here is increasingly kind of, if not at the cutting edge, then at least kind of among the best that there is in London. I don't know, Doug, if you'd want to add anything to
that. So thank you. I'm very pleased to see this. It has come from residents, and my job is to make sure that we deliver it, should it be approved. So we are determined to be held to account by our residents to ensure that we're engaging with them and consulting them in what we do. And it's the how we do things now. It's not just, we've forgotten, or it's an add-on. It's part of everything that we need to do. Well, we are doing, but we need to continue that. And as Dan said, we are not complacent in this matter at all.
Good. Anne.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Kim and Doug and Dan. And obviously, I support any mechanisms or new ideas for engaging with our residents, and particularly to make sure that we listen to those residents that are in council buildings. I guess I had two questions. The first question is obviously there's been some consultation and discussion with residents about this. And I just wondered what feedback you had on areas that they felt we needed to improve on. So that's the first question. And the second question is about the TCC and the homes group. And obviously, these are mechanisms for resident involvement and engagement. And I just wondered whether you had any reflections on how these two groups are working and any improvements that you could see in those forums. And indeed, whether any improvements have been asked by our residents to improve them.
Doug?
Yeah, so in terms of the consultation, so this came from residents. So in terms of the resident involvement strategy, it is we've basically taken a bit of a back seat in many ways. So we haven't said, oh, you need to do this or you need to do that. So this is what they want. In terms of how we consult. Of course, during that process, Councillor, we've had quite a lot of views about the services that we deliver and where we need to improve during that. And that's all been taken into account in terms of the procedures and the policies that we will be delivering across our service areas. But in terms of this, this is it, if you like, in terms of what our residents are telling us. So it was formulated by a steering group made up of residents association reps who went round to all the estates and areas to tell people what they were doing. And we had a number of focus groups, and we had the away day, and we then sent we then carried out a borough-wide consultation. So in terms of that, we've put that into this. Then in terms of your second point, sorry, Councillor.
Can you repeat your second point?
Well, it was about the TCC and the Homes Group, yes. And obviously their engagement forums and mechanisms, and are they working?
So in terms of the TCC and how people get engaged, this was reviewed as part of this, and there is, within this strategy, there is a recommendation as to how that works going forward. Certainly, whilst residents' associations not have a place, I think if there's anything that we need to be directed on, which is in this strategy, is other ways in which we engage residents. So TCC is made up of our residents' associations, and I want to change that slightly in terms of its makeup, but in terms of the overall strategy, it isn't the only thing that we do, and actually the strategy points us to ensuring that we do other things. And certainly post-pandemic, or during this pandemic, we've adapted to that in many ways, so that we're able to engage with actually a wider sections of our residents, notwithstanding there are some that have been sort of marginalised by this, but these are the issues that our residents want us to take forward, and that's what we're putting forward today.
Well, I guess that was my point. I just wanted to make sure that all our residents, regardless of what type of council building or residence they're in, are able to have a voice, and I guess that's why I was asking the question.
Can I just sort of chip in on something you said, Anne, a little bit earlier about reflections? I mean, I was just actually thinking about reflections of the many TCC meetings. I go to all of the meetings, and I think it's fair to say in the early meetings, it's important to know when we took the housing stack, but we actually resurrected the TCC meetings because they'd actually been stopped previously under the TMO. I think they always found them a bit of a difficult affair. Well, I mean, it's fair to say my reflection is those early meetings were really difficult. There was a lot of anger that we were dealing with. There were a lot of specific complaints about the poor standard of housing as well. And I think as we have gone on now, another over 2.5 years, it has changed, and there is far more involvement and engagement in terms of what we are doing, and very constructive tone. And I want to repeat how pleased I am and thankful I am for the amount of time that people give up. And I think the other reflection, which is the byproduct of that, is obviously having that process means that things take longer. If you look at the number of our refurbishment programs and our capital programs, they are taking longer because we are involving the residents in that process, and it will come back and we'll change anyway. So although we could say, if I talk about something like Adair and Hazelwood, where in terms of the recladding, it has taken longer to get there, but at least now we've got there, it's something that the residents feel and take ownership for, which is obviously the key and the important thing.
And it's what they want.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Catherine.
Thank you. Actually, Doug answered my question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Elizabeth, can I just sorry.
Sorry, can I just see the rest of the questions, and then maybe you want to come back, Kim. Mary-Therese?
Yeah, if I could just say that I welcome the report and the strategy, and I understand we are constrained at the moment because of the pandemic and everything, but I think we should be congratulated to keep on going, engaging with people in these circumstances. I think it's similar to consultation on the budget. I can't wait until we get back to the situation where we can actually meet people face to face, because there's always something we can do to improve things, and I think having actual meetings will help. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Monica.
Thank you, Councillor Press. And as a resident in a council building, member of the TCC and North Kensington councillor, I just wanted to note the amount of work and commitment by housing management, Iago, Doug and Kim on the meetings, and we do remember what they were like when the TCC was reconstituted more than 2 years ago. So it really has been a massive commitment by residents and by staff. And if you remember what community engagement used to mean, and I was engaging with the TMO since 1996, then we had quite a lot of discussion around engagement to involvement. And I think this is such a move forward, and we need to note the variety of ways that engagement and involvement is allowed for and happening in this strategy. But I believe our aim should be participation, as it is in the charter that we've adopted. So my only point would be, I think we've actually got excellent attendance now actually at the TCC through Zoom. We have to be careful about people that we don't know we are excluding. But I feel as long as we, and I should turn this into a question, I hope we are seeing this document as an evolving, living document, taking us on the route to participation. I think with the seminars I've been to, we're very much on that road, but I would hope that later it has regular reviews and that we are looking at more qualitative results as opposed to the numbers-based one, which this strategy has at the moment. So it would be quite good at some point, and I will do this through the TCC, but to have regular reviews and evolving, because I think many of us would like to be moving more to what participation means and seeing many residents in council-owned estates as clients and customers as the behaviour, and that I still think is an aim. But I did want to note my support, and I do think the TCCs are one of the few quite enjoyable meetings that I attend on a regular basis, and actually where a lot of scrutiny is happening. And I would like the leadership to be looking at perhaps ways that things like the TCC might feed into the other scrutiny committees. Thank you very much.
Emulated actually as well. I was going to suggest that it's a good thing for members of the leadership team to pop into periodically, because as you say, you get very good resident participation and involvement, and it's something that we need to emulate across the council.
Yeah. So thank you again, Doug and Iago.
Shall I ask Dory for his comments, and then maybe Kim, you'd like to wrap up?
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Chair. But I can see, I think, Councillor Siren's hand up.
I think it's an old hand.
It's a legacy hand, as somebody called it.
A legacy
I might
hand.
prefer that. A legacy. Wouldn't like to call her hand old. Anyway, on paper A7, I have to say the report, it does look good, and I must say I'm encouraged by Councillor Press's comments. Oh, sorry, I'm Dory Schmetterling, Councillor in Pembridge Ward. I'm encouraged by Councillor Press's comments, remarks, as she is from this point of view of being a tenant and a resident, so seeing the other side of the coin, as it were. But still, the question I have, perhaps it's not quite so, I can half expect the answer, but are people responding to Housing Matters and North Ken, the North Ken newsletters, and not thinking it's a waste of time? They're covering topics which don't really matter that much. It's more council propaganda. I've got 3 questions. Should I put them all together, or just
yes,
one
I
at a
think
time?
so.
Altogether.
Can I ask you, Dory, are you on the Housing Scrutiny Committee?
Yes.
Ah, okay. I just wondered, has this not been discussed at the Housing Scrutiny Committee?
Not this aspect. I actually prepared the questions for the other day, yesterday, but it turned out I was looking at the report for tonight.
Ah, So it hasn't been actually discussed at Housing Security, in which case you're very welcome to ask your questions tonight. So please continue.
No, it's not, I'm not repeating questions. The questions I had last night I already asked. It was about digital use and so on. That's all we've done. This turns out that these questions are actually for this report. Because there was a reference in connection with last night's meeting, there was a reference to these reports, and I just looked at them and made my notes, not realizing they wouldn't come up yesterday. Anyway, so question one is the reaction to Housing Matters and North Kent News email. Housing Matters, I think, is paper. I mean, I get it.
Okay.
Second question, sorry, should I ask all three of them?
Yes.
The second question is, I mean, again, I was encouraged by Councillor Press's comments, and indeed Doug Goldring's, about the attendance of meetings. But my question is, how well are they attended besides the TCC meetings, if there are, and are they not officer heavy? And question three is on page, it relates to sorry, it's, wait a minute, we're looking at paper A7. Sorry, I think the next question is on paper 8. The resident is measuring success.
So let's go on these two. So
let's do those two first. Then
the questions are: is North Kent News propaganda? Basically, is that, and then secondly, are the meetings really too officer heavy?
Yeah, well, let me chip in, and then I'm sure Doug would like to expand on it. First of all, thank you for the question. Sorry. First of all, we've referred to within this about the panel, the editorial panel on Housing Matters. So it's very much the residents that are actually deciding what goes into that magazine. It's not propaganda. I mean, there are obviously information that we have to put at. I think I'm quite pleased, in as much when I look at it, it's not a self-congratulatory paper at all. So I think, as I say, there is the panel on that, and it goes to everybody. And the feedback we get is both negative and positive. That will come back. People will do it, and Doug might want to comment on that. The second thing is that you talk about resident heavy, officer heavy meetings as being a bad thing, which I have to say I don't. I'm always very encouraged by the number of officers that take the time to go and sit in an evening's meeting, to be able to be there, to be able to answer questions that residents raise, because they might come across quite a broad church of questions. So I don't see that as a bad thing. We obviously encourage people to come as much as possible. I think I smile also and say some of the meetings I go to, which are lowly attended, there's a reason for that, because there's not really any issues that people want to raise, and there's an element of that to a lot of the earlier meetings as well. But Doug, I don't know if you want to comment at all on Housing Matters.
The only thing I would say is that in the last issue of Housing Matters, Councillor, we asked for people's feedback. That hasn't quite been collated, but within the next few weeks we should have that. So we'll be able to give some qualitative and quantitative answers to this question in terms of what people think of the newsletter. It's a newsletter that goes to all our residents. That's what Housing Matters is. North Kent News is something that goes to a geographical area, but to every resident. So they're slightly different.
Thanks. I've just realised my question actually didn't come across quite the way, the second one about officer attendance didn't come across quite the way I intended it to. Of course, I'm happy that a lot of people do attend and take the time. It was meant not a lot of people come, but I think address that because they're not bothered. But is it because they're really nothing to discuss, or just can't be bothered to engage with the council? That's really the question.
So probably on average, so I appreciate the last TCC was probably on the lighter side than we've had previously, but it's roughly on average about 25 to 30 residents groups attend the TCC.
Thank you very much, Chair. I found my third question does relate to this paper. My other question relates to the next paper. My third question is, it is was section 8, not paper 8, that I've made it 8 on. I noted on the end, section 8, page 17. There are the performance indicators, and I'm interested how they were arrived at, and I'd like to mention 3 of them. Measuring success. It says 1,000 attendees per annum at 100 meetings. So how do you get there? And The third point is it says the new resident associations and compacts established. It says 5 PA, or the plan is to establish 5 PA. How do you arrive at that figure, and how do you know when you've run out of new ones to establish? Thanks.
Doug?
So that's a fair point. We know which estates don't have residents associations. Clearly, that wouldn't be sustainable year in, year out. But taking a leaf out of Councillor Press's book, we will review this on an annual basis, and we feel that we can do this certainly next year. And I think that's what residents want. In fact, we've set up a few new residents groups just recently. So it's a fair point. But for next year, I think we've got to aim to do this, because we think there are some estates where, with a bit of help, we can get a good residents group set up.
Thanks. But what about how do you arrive at this 100 per year meetings and 1,000 per year attendees? I mean, what's the reference, and what's good, and what happened last year? So I'm just wondering what the context is for these numbers. I mean, they sound good, they look good.
Okay, thank you for the question. What's the context of the numbers, Doug?
So this is, as I keep saying, this has come from residents, but it's based on what we've been doing thus far. So what we have put in place equals about this amount plus a little bit more. So it's about moving us forward. So it's based on where we're at now, with a bit of push to get us to a slightly higher number. But I think it's a valid point, and it's as I say, it is something we can review next year. But it has come from our residents, and we do want to work with it, and that's what we'd like to see if we can achieve next year.
Can I just make the point that actually I'm very disappointed that this paper hasn't been discussed at scrutiny before it's come to the leadership team, because obviously most of these questions could have been answered then. So perhaps you might like to suggest to your chair that he looks at what papers are coming to the leadership team meeting and make sure that they're scrutinised before they come. Meanwhile, I will allow one more question from IG, whoever IG is, who's asked a question.
Sorry, this is Iago Griffith, the author. That's all. I just thought
welcome, Iago.
And already, since I've spearheaded the digital engagement with our residents, I can't seem to connect a team, so I'm connecting via phone. But if I may, I just wanted to just respond a bit to Dorie's comments there. I mean, really just to echo Doug's comments. So we sat down with the residents on those matrix, and we did a bit of maths. We looked back at the meetings we've held to date, and they've been really 2 or 3 or 4 a week on occasion, and we've done some sums around that, and as I say, set a slightly ambitious target for next year, and again with the setting up of those RAs and compacts. But just also on the scrutiny committee, I think it was sent round, and we did receive comments from various councillors on that committee as part of the preparation of this report.
Good.
Elizabeth, may I chip in?
Yes, please do.
Okay, I mean, again, just to say that I've received the comments. They arrived this afternoon, and the note here says that these are comments, obviously, from the Environmental Select Committee have contributed, and the communities. Housing and communities. And I just want to reiterate, I mean, we had a theme meeting last night, and it's all well and good theme meetings, but, important papers like this should be going to scrutiny committee and should be debated. And the questions that Dorie has been raising tonight, which are all very good questions, it's a shame that wasn't afforded to, obviously, the panel and the rest of the audience. But anyway, I felt that I should just highlight a couple of the points that were made by the select committee here, running through. There are a number of points. One, there was obviously a general welcome to the sustainability. There's a reference to fabric first approach to our buildings, which is effectively looking at insulation before you look at systems of heating. Which is very much we're doing, and we'll talk about that in terms of when we're dealing with fuel poverty in a minute. Sustainable drainage systems, which again is something that hang on, I'm going completely mad. we're talking about resident involvement. I'm talking about the wrong paper. I'm just looking at this thing. Hang on.
Okay. Sorry, I thought the additional paper was for
Elizabeth,
the next one.
It was your point about prompting that made me realise I had a piece of paper, but we'll talk about it in the next.
Next one. I think we're almost ready to go, but Marie-Therese.
Yeah, just to say, I mean, I will take your comments back, Elizabeth and Kim, to the chair, but it is actually up to the chair and the committee of scrutiny to set the agenda, not the leadership team.
Absolutely.
But I will take it back.
Let me be absolutely clear. We don't wish to set any agenda for any of the scrutiny committees. I'm just saying that in future, questions should actually go to scrutiny committees before they come to the leadership team, because obviously we have limited time in the leadership team and we're concentrating on the papers that we've got, and it's within the remit of scrutiny committees to have a look at them before they come to us. And that's where people like Dory, with his absolutely legitimate questions, he should be asking the questions there. That's what I'm saying. Emma, and then we're going to move on.
Yeah, I was just going to echo what you said. Marie-Therese, I completely agree. It's not for us, but I think it would be interesting to know whether the chair actually asked members of committee like Dory whether they'd like to discuss this paper. I think that might be worth asking.
But as we say, we're not absolutely. Scrutiny chairs can decide whatever they wish to scrutinise. But perhaps it would be sensible if they'd like to scrutinise things which are really important strategies, which are involving a huge amount of our residents and which matter, actually, which really matter to our residents. Okay, is the leadership team happy to agree the housing management resident involvement strategy?
Agreed.
Good. Now we come on to paper A8, where I believe there was a supplementary late paper from the scrutiny committee, which you can talk to as well.
Oh dear, it's been a long night, I'm afraid. Yes,
it's a long night, right? Can we get back?
8-9 as well with me afterwards. So let's get on to the sustainable fuel.
Can we go A8 first, one step at a time, please?
Okay, so again, as by way of an introduction, housing is going to be a most difficult challenge in terms of reaching our carbon zero target, and I've talked all about the high age of the stock. And although we haven't completed a detailed analysis or scoping, the cost could be £100 million in order to achieve this one. And this is obviously on top of the challenges that we face on the HRA, which we've already discussed as far as the revenue budget is concerned. But I mean, being positive, looking for beyond the challenges, this plan does represent a very ambitious and positive roadmap to us making our housing net zero carbon target at 2030. And the report highlights 9 different priorities that we need to focus on. And I won't go into the detail of that, it's in the paper. But reviewing all aspects of our operation and come up with a plan, and that's a mixture of both capital investment and also how we work as offices is obviously going to be incredibly important. And there's no doubt that it's going to be an evolution in technology, plus looking at government funding that's going to help us, and we're going to have to maximise if we're to obviously achieve this target. I think I'd like to just talk a little bit about Lancaster West, because this is obviously very much an opportunity for us to look at different methods of greening existing housing stock, and we're trialling a lot of innovative approaches and practices that can be applied elsewhere in due course. At Treadgold Hout, we've got this new energy sprung retrofit, which talks about actually the fabric first approach, which is on my supplemental paper, in terms of how you might provide better insulation. And again, this is cutting edge in terms of making a building carbon neutral, and which is obviously our challenge. I also wanted just to touch on the success of grant funding that we have been able to to get from various sources. I'm not in a position to tell you about everything that we've been successful in achieving because we're embargoed, but from talking about what that level of investment, but it will make a good and substantial contribution, to reach our objective of making Lancaster West a 21st century estate. So I think Also, I'll just talk a little bit about asks for governments. You know, we talked about the grants, and it's clear that this challenge is going to be difficult for us to solve alone. And I've actually published an article to go into the Municipal Journal on this, asking for a number of things. First of all, greater freedom for us within our borough to retrofit buildings that are listed or in conservation areas, because although, you know, we are very proud and it's very important that we retain our heritage, you know, with over 75% of our boroughs in conservation zones, there's an inordinate amount of work, you know, to look at how we might reduce, you know, our carbon emissions on listed buildings. And this is going to act as a blocker for us to achieve our targets. And then secondly, it's really painfully apparent to the council, you know, that it's difficult for us to do and fund this on our own. So you know, we've already have a requirement for 370 million of capital investment to bring up, let alone what these greening improvements are. So it's a big burden on us. It's a big burden on our residents. And I know the government fully appreciates the level of investment that's needed and will benefit from their social decarbonisation fund, which, you know, we are benefiting from, and we hope to benefit more. But I just really wanted to end up with a clear message that, you know, we need more of the same. And the more we can alleviate the pressure from our residents and our HRA, the better, and particularly, you know, the better we're going to be able to deal with the challenges that we're facing. So thank you. But I just want to finish off by thanking again the officers for the ongoing effort to put all this together and the comprehensive plan to achieve our reduction targets. Thank you.
Jem.
Thank you. I think I'd just like to add, I mean, this is really wonderful, Kim, because it is such a key important thing that the council is doing. And fuel poverty does have a lot of overlap with public health. And so I am very keen that the public health grant does look at how improving people's fuel poverty can actually help their public health issues as well, given that drafts and cold homes can lead to issues with asthma and breathing problems. But one thing I wanted to ask Doug is, recently the amount of carbon that's emitted from use of the grid has dropped quite dramatically in the UK. And I was just wondering, Doug, if you're sort of modelling going forwards, what it will mean for the housing stock as the grid sort of switches to renewables, because clearly that's going to help you on your way. So I was just wondering if you've sort of modelled that out at all.
So we haven't completed any modelling on that, Councillor, but it's a very valid point that we need to, as we move forward on our journey to zero carbon, that we do that on a very regular basis so that we're clear about where we're at and what it is that we are aiming to achieve on each step. So if this is approved, then the next step is clearly to set out the inevitable action plans with what we've already got them, but in preparation of this, but just trying to establish when we're going to deliver each aspect, because there are 50 elements of work for us in this that we're planning to deliver, and within that you need to keep a tight review on what you're achieving, and that is a key one, to know where you're at and what you're delivering actually in terms of meeting your target.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions on this from the leadership team? From Mary-Therese?
Yeah, I mean, just one question. The paper talks about fuel poverty and also the need to be greener. But as I understand it, things like heat pumps, etc., are more expensive. So how are you going to square that circle?
I'll sort of just chip in. Again, I'm going to go back to Lancaster West. We're trialling at Lancaster West a number of systems, and that would be air source heating, ground source heating, and a new one which is actually looking at waste and sewage and how that might be looked at. And all of that obviously is looking at assessing in terms of cost and in terms of cost reduction in terms of the heating bill on that. I think it's important just also to remember that the direction of travel as far as the government is concerned. I mean, the government has ambitions for us to eliminate gas. by 2030. And if those sort of things, we have to start looking at district heating systems, and that's again something we're looking at as far as Lanc West is concerned. But that must be something that potentially could be used throughout the rest of the borough. At the moment, looking at the cost benefit on it, things like ground source or air source heating are the better way, supplemented with what do they call the things? Solar panels. It appears to be there, but it's still early days.
Okay, thank you.
Dorry, I'm aware there has been a report from the scrutiny committee. So unless your question is really very short, I would have expected you to have raised everything at the scrutiny committee. But do you have a very short question?
I've got 3 questions, but the answers should be short. And this did not come to us yesterday, as far as I can tell.
Did it not?
No, that's why I'm asking it here.
Right.
May I proceed, Chair?
Thank you.
I'll just take
And
my
please do continue, but if you can be succinct, that would be much appreciated.
Well, it also depends on the answers. I've got 3 questions, and I'll put 2 of them together. I think the third one's sort of a bit separate. Question 1 is, what actually is the definition of an energy efficient, sustainable building? Because if it's airtight, let's say, as often it seems to me, I've heard, not in this context, but outside the council, that leads to mold, can lead to mold. And the related question is, I thought I saw in this paper, no underfloor heating. Why is that?
Great, that's admirably succinct.
Well,
I'm looking at Doug on this one about the underfloor heating.
Can I respond to those 2?
Yeah. If this is okay, I believe I have Kaz Scott, who has much more knowledge on these sorts of issues than I do. Just to say, we have recognised the issue on ventilation and mould in the report, but I wonder if Kaz can help.
Yeah, we did make reference to increased airtightness and noted that it can lead to increased problems with damp and mold, primarily from condensation. And that's just, that's something that happened in the UK when double glazing was first kind of introduced. And it's just about ensuring that we raise awareness about good ventilation in homes, and you can get trickle vents on windows that can help tackle that. And it's also something that we can write into our introduction packs and our tenants handbook in terms of helping residents better manage a home that becomes more airtight and efficient. And then underfloor heating, I don't believe that's referenced in the strategy, and it's not something that we have planned in terms of thought about yet. It's more in relation to different heating systems and different energy sources that we've been looking at, rather than the actual infrastructure in the home.
Okay. It's one step back, as it were, or one step above that you've been thinking of, rather than the minutiae. Yep. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much.
Can I ask my 3rd question now, please?
Yes, but as I keep saying, in the future, these really have to go to the scrutiny, or to the scrutiny chair, even if he does not bring the report to scrutiny committee.
Yes, okay. It's in, where are we? On
because the detail to which you want to go in isn't really
I want to know,
correct with this committee.
Do you mind, can I ask or not?
Yes, please do.
Thank you. No, I appreciate what you're saying. I accept what you say, as you know. It's on page 4. There's a more in the introduction. It's about the carbon emissions and talking about percentage changes and so on. I mean, some of this has got little context to me. For example, in first paragraph under how we work towards our objectives, energy and fuel poverty, it says this was a 38% decrease compared to 2005 and a 1% decrease compared to 2017. I mean, it's a splendid number, but is this 38% decrease of what? As a percentage of the total, or as an absolute decrease of where it was, over this time? It doesn't make any sense to me. I'm not necessarily asking for an answer now, but I'm just saying that when this sort of thing was written,
could we have an answer sent to Councillor Schmidtling?
Absolutely.
Great.
I will make sure that happens within a week.
Yes, it's just that
We'll
it should
get
be clearer.
responded to within a week, Dory. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And therefore, can we please approve the sustainability and fuel poverty strategy?
Sorry, Elizabeth, I'm going to interrupt. Would you like me to read the comments that have come on this paper?
Have they not been circulated?
Well, they've been given to me.
Have they been circulated to the leadership team? Because they certainly circulated to me.
I don't.
We asked governance, have they been circulated, and have the leadership team read them? Because if they have, they've read them, there are no further questions. If they haven't, then we need to look at them.
They were circulated to all members of the leadership team, yes.
Right. Do any members of the leadership team have any comments or anything further to add to what the scrutiny committee have proposed, or no? So Kim, is there anything which would change our...
No, I think they're generally quite welcoming the and highlighting areas that we might like to look at as part of the strategy. So I think the point is that I can take them away and provide them to our capital projects team.
Yes, I think that would be very helpful. I think some of the comments are very helpful. What time was it circulated?
I would have to check on my email. I got them.
I've got it here, Kim. 1:30.
1:30. Okay. In future, it would be helpful to have comments a bit earlier. But as I've said, they were circulated. The leadership team have read them. There are no further comments apart from say that they're helpful and that Kim will take the comments away. Okay, could we please now, having agreed the sustainability and fuel poverty strategy, could we please go to paper A9, which is the water rates commission refund. Wow, level of refund estimated to be approximately £2.5 million. That's quite a lot. Judith, I've noted that you'd wish to ask a question, but does the leader, Kim, over to you?
No, I'm going to hand it straight to Doug in terms of to explain why we're in this position and all about the London boroughs.
So there are a number of London boroughs that are in this position, and you may recall in previous business plan papers for the last couple of years, we've highlighted that there is a risk that we may have to pay back the commission that the council received in terms of the collection of water rates on behalf of Thames Water. The paper sets out the legal framework, the Southwark case, and then followed by a further case regarding the Royal Borough of Kingston upon Thames. Our legal advice is quite clear that we should not contest this any further, and we should do what we think is the right thing and not hand back the money that we took from a specific date, and that specific date has been set because that is the date of the agreement, which is clear that we could be deemed to be a water seller. Because I think one of the things to bear in mind, business-wise, it would be very unrealistic, wouldn't it, to take on the collection of water rates for another company and not expect to get paid for it. But that's exactly what's occurring. And when you say get paid for it, that money then goes back into the housing revenue account and gets used to deliver services. So it is money that was used to deliver council house services. That said, we have factored that into the business plan paper that was presented earlier today. So my recommendation is that we should consider this refund. There are lots of ancillary. There are just lots of ancillary bits about how we deal with former tenants, the level of interest that gets charged, and so on and so forth. And we've been working with other boroughs in terms of setting some commonality on those things.
Thank you. I think it's pretty straightforward. Are there any questions? Unfortunate, but straightforward. No. Marie-Therese, any questions from you?
No, I think we have to follow the legal advice, so nothing from me.
And Councillor Blakeman, last word to you.
Thank you. I have two questions. Firstly, will the victims and the survivors of the Grenfell Tower fire be reimbursed? And will this paper go back to the TCC? Because thus far the TCC have only been told that legal advice was being sought.
So absolutely, it will go to anyone who was a council tenant between 2006 and 2017 is entitled to this. It works out, if you've been here the whole of that period, about £350 that you would be entitled to. And yes, more than happy to bring this back next week, Councillor.
But
that's when TCC is.
The people who died at the Grenfell Tower fire will also be entitled to refunds.
So certainly they would be, and we will look at the mechanisms for resolving that.
Thank you. So can we please agree for paper A9, the recommendations on the screen in front of you? Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Is there any other business? No. I'd just then like to say thank you very much for coming. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your interest if you're screening in from home. And I wish you a very good evening, and that the next meeting, the leadership team, will be on Wednesday, the 17th of March. And until then, good night.